Linda Martinez pushed her cleaning cart down the long hallway of Northwind Aerospace every night at exactly 10 o'clock. Her footsteps echoed softly on the polished floor as she made her way to the engineering offices. For 12 years, she had walked these same halls, cleaned these same rooms, and watched the same people work on projects she could only dream of being part of. The building was mostly empty at night, except for a few engineers who stayed late to work on special projects. Linda liked the quiet. It gave her time to think and observe without anyone bothering her. Most of the day shift workers barely noticed her anyway. To them, she was just the cleaning lady who emptied their trash cans and mopped their floors. Linda was 42 years old and had been working at Northwind since she was 30. She had 2 children, Maria, who was 16, and Carlos, who was 14. Their father had left when Carlos was just 2 years old, leaving Linda to raise them alone. She needed a job that paid well enough to support her family, and night janitor. Work at the aerospace company was one of the better-paying jobs she could find without a college degree. But Linda did have a college degree. She had studied electrical engineering at Central Community College for 3 years before her husband left. She had been just 1 semester away from graduating when everything fell apart. With 2 small children and no money, she had to quit school and find work immediately. The textbooks were still in a box in her closet at home, along with her old notebooks full of circuit diagrams and formulas. Every night as Linda cleaned the offices, she would see the engineers working on the F-47 Lightning fighter jet. The project had been going on for 5 years, and it was the most advanced military aircraft the company had ever built. The jet was sleek and black, with technology so secret that most workers weren't even allowed to look at it. But Linda saw everything during her night rounds. Derek Thompson was one of the lead engineers on the project. He was tall and thin with glasses that he constantly pushed up his nose. Derek always worked late, often staying until midnight or later. His desk was always covered with papers, blueprints, and computer printouts. When Linda came to empty his trash can, Derek would barely look up from his work. If he did notice her, he might nod slightly, but he never spoke to her. Kate Sullivan was the project manager. She was in her early 40s, about Linda's age, but the 2 women lived in completely different worlds. Kate wore expensive suits and carried a leather briefcase. She drove a new car and lived in the wealthy part of town. Kate was always on her phone, talking to important people about budgets and deadlines. When Linda cleaned Kate's office, Kate would either ignore her completely or ask her to come back later because she was too busy. Paul Mitchell was the chief engineer, the man in charge of the entire F-47 project. He was older, maybe 55, with gray hair and a serious face. Paul had been with the company for 25 years and had worked on many famous aircraft. He was respected by everyone and feared by some. Paul never acknowledged Linda's presence at all. To him, she simply didn't exist, but Linda saw and heard everything. As she quietly wiped down desks and emptied wastebaskets, she listened to the engineers talk about problems with the jet's electrical systems. She saw the diagrams they left on their desks, showing complex wiring patterns and computer circuits. She noticed which components they were having trouble with and which tests were failing. Linda had always been good with electronics, even as a child. Her father had been an electrician, and he had taught her how to read electrical diagrams and understand how circuits worked. When she was in college, her professors had said she had a natural talent for electrical engineering. She could look at a complex circuit and quickly understand how it was supposed to work. Now, as she cleaned around the F-47 project, Linda found herself studying the technical papers the engineers left behind. She would memorize the diagrams and think about them later at home. She began to understand how the jet's electrical systems were designed and how they were supposed to work together. Sometimes Linda would see problems that the engineers seemed to miss. She noticed when wiring diagrams had small errors or when test results showed patterns that looked wrong, but she never said anything. Who would listen to a janitor's opinion about advanced military technology? Carl Johnson was Linda's supervisor. He was responsible for all the night shift cleaning crew, which included Linda and 4 other workers. Carl was a big man with a loud voice who liked to make jokes. He often made fun of Linda for looking too closely at the engineer's work. "Hey, Linda, Carl would say with a laugh. Are you trying to figure out how to build rockets? Maybe you should stick to mopping floors and leave the thinking to the smart people. The other janitors would laugh along with Carl, but Linda's friend Rosa Valdez always defended her. Rosa was a few years older than Linda and had been working at the company even longer. She cleaned the offices on the other side of the building, but she and Linda often took their breaks together. Linda is smart, Rosa would tell Carl. She notices things that other people don't see. Maybe if these engineers listened to her, they wouldn't have so many problems. But Carl just laughed louder. Right, Rosa. I'm sure the Pentagon is going to ask our cleaning lady for advice on building fighter jets. Linda never got angry when people made fun of her. She had learned to stay quiet and focus on her work, but inside, she was always thinking and learning. She bought used engineering textbooks from garage sales and studied them at home after her children went to bed. She practiced solving electrical problems and kept up with new technology by reading articles online at the public library. One night, as Linda was cleaning Derek Thompson's office, she found a printout in his trash can that showed test results from the F-47's main computer system. The numbers looked strange to her. There was a pattern in the data that reminded her of something she had learned in college about electromagnetic interference. She studied the printout carefully before throwing it away. Over the next few weeks, Linda paid special attention to the F-47 project. She noticed that the engineers seemed frustrated and were working longer hours than usual. She heard them talking about problems with the jet's electronics, but they couldn't figure out what was causing the issues. Linda began to suspect that she knew what the problem might be, but she kept her thoughts to herself. After all, she was just a janitor. What? Could she possibly know that the company's best engineers didn't already know? It was a cold Tuesday morning in March when everything changed at Northwind Aerospace. Linda had just finished her night shift and was getting ready to go home when she heard sirens in the distance. She looked out the window and saw emergency vehicles racing toward the company's private airfield. Major Alex Turner had been flying the F-47 Lightning for what was supposed to be a routine test flight. He was an experienced pilot who had flown many different types of military aircraft. Alex was calm and professional, the kind of pilot the military trusted with their most expensive and secret planes. But at exactly 9:47 that morning, everything went wrong. Alex was flying at 15,000 feet when the jet's main computer system suddenly shut down. One moment, all his instruments were working perfectly. The next moment, his screens went black and warning lights started flashing everywhere. Control tower, this is Lightning 1, Alex said into his radio, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm experiencing multiple system failures. All my main electronics just went dead. The control tower immediately went into emergency mode. Air traffic controller Jenny Walsh had been working at the airfield for 8 years, but she had never heard a pilot sound so concerned. Lightning 1, what is your current status? She asked. I've lost navigation. Communications are cutting in and out, and my flight control computer is completely down, Alex replied. I'm flying this thing manually, but I don't know how long I can keep it stable. Back at the main building, alarms started going off in the engineering department. The F-47 was equipped with special sensors that sent data back to the ground during test flights. When the plane's systems failed, the engineers on the ground knew about it immediately. Derek Thompson was in the middle of drinking his morning coffee when his computer screen lit up with red warning messages. He nearly spilled his coffee as he read the alerts. Every major system on the F-47 had stopped working at the same time. Kate! Derek shouted across the office. You need to see this right now! Kate Sullivan ran over to Derek's desk, her high heels clicking on the floor. When she saw the data on his screen, her face went pale. How is this possible? She whispered. These systems don't all fail at once. They're completely separate from each other. Within minutes, Paul Mitchell arrived in the engineering department. The chief engineer looked at the data and immediately understood how serious the situation was. Get me a direct line to the pilot, he ordered, and call Jonathan Hayes right now. The CEO needs to know about this. Meanwhile, Major Alex Turner was fighting to keep the F-47 in the air. Without his computer systems, flying the advanced jet was like trying to drive a car blindfolded. The plane was designed to be controlled by computers, not flown manually. "Control tower, I'm going to attempt an emergency landing," Alex announced. "Clear the runway and have emergency crews standing by." Jenny Walsh's hands were shaking as she cleared all other air traffic from the area. She watched on her radar screen as the F-47 approached the runway much faster than normal. "Lightning One, you're coming in too fast," she warned. "I know," Alex replied. "But without my computer systems, this is the best I can do." The landing was rough and scary, but Alex managed to get the plane down safely. Fire trucks and ambulances raced toward the runway as the F-47 rolled to a stop. But when Alex climbed out of the cockpit, he was unhurt. The plane, however, was another story. Linda was still in the parking lot when she saw the F-47 land. Even from a distance, she could tell something was very wrong. The plane had landed too hard and too fast. She could see emergency crews surrounding it. By noon, the news had spread throughout the entire company. The F-47 Lightning, the most advanced fighter jet Northwind Aerospace had ever built, had suffered a complete system failure. The plane that was supposed to represent the future of military aviation had nearly crashed on what should have been a simple test flight. CEO Jonathan Hayes called an emergency meeting with all the senior staff. Jonathan was a tall man in his 50s who had been running Northwind for 10 years. He had seen the company through good times and bad, but this was the worst crisis he had ever faced. "Gentlemen and ladies," Jonathan said to the room full of worried executives, "we have a serious problem. The Pentagon has invested $2 billion in this project. If we can't figure out what went wrong, they might cancel the entire program." Paul Mitchell stood up to address the group. "We're putting together an emergency team to investigate the failure. We'll work around the clock until we find the cause." Sharon Brooks was chosen to lead the investigation team. She was one of the company's best engineers, known for solving difficult problems that others couldn't figure out. Sharon was smart, dedicated, and had experience with complex electrical systems. "I want Derek Thompson, Ryan Clark, and Amy Foster on my team," Sharon announced. "We'll start by examining every piece of data from the test flight." The investigation team worked non-stop for the next 3 days. They took apart sections of the F-47's electrical system, ran hundreds of computer tests, and analyzed every bit of information they could find. But no matter what they tried, they couldn't figure out what had caused all the systems to fail at the same time. Derek Thompson hadn't slept more than a few hours since the crisis began. His desk was covered with printouts, diagrams, and empty coffee cups. "This doesn't make sense," he told Sharon. "These systems are completely independent. If one fails, the others should keep working." Ryan Clark was the company's best systems analyst. He had been working with computers for 15 years and had never seen anything like this. "It's like someone threw a switch and turned off everything at once," he said. "But there is no such switch." Amy Foster specialized in electronics and had built many of the F-47 circuit boards herself. She had tested every component multiple times, but everything seemed to be working perfectly. "The hardware is fine," she reported to Sharon. "Whatever caused this failure, it wasn't a broken part." Meanwhile, word of the F-47's problems was starting to leak to the news media. Military reporter Tom Brady from Channel 7 News heard about the emergency landing and began asking questions. Soon, other reporters were calling the company, wanting to know if the expensive new fighter jet was defective. Colonel Steve Martinez flew in from Washington to see the situation for himself. Steve was the Pentagon's project manager for the F-47 program, and he was not happy. "This plane was supposed to be ready for deployment next year," he told Jonathan Hayes. "My superiors are asking serious questions about whether this project is worth continuing." The pressure was enormous. Hundreds of jobs were at stake, not just at Northwind but at dozens of smaller companies that supplied parts for the F-47. If the program was canceled, it would be a disaster for everyone involved. Linda continued working her night shifts during the crisis, but the atmosphere in the building had completely changed. The engineers were stressed and worried. They worked later hours and drank more coffee. Some of them looked like they hadn't slept in days. As Linda cleaned the offices, she could see the investigation team's work spread out everywhere. There, were circuit diagrams taped to walls, computer printouts covering every desk, and whiteboards filled with equations and theories. She could tell they were desperate to find an answer. But Linda had been thinking about the problem too. She remembered the strange test results she had seen in Derek's trash can weeks earlier. She remembered the pattern in the numbers that had reminded her of electromagnetic interference. And she was starting to believe she might know what had gone wrong with the F-47 Lightning. Friday night came and Linda was pushing her cleaning cart through the engineering department as usual. But nothing felt usual anymore. The whole building seemed different since the F-47 had nearly crashed. Engineers were working at all hours, and the hallways buzzed with worried conversations even late at night. As Linda approached Sharon Brooks's office, she could hear Sharon talking on the phone. The door was slightly open and Sharon's voice sounded tired and frustrated. "General Wilson, I understand your concerns," Sharon was saying, "but we've been working on this problem for 6 days straight, and we still don't have an answer. Every test we run comes back normal. Every component we check works perfectly, but something is causing these systems to fail, and we can't figure out what it is." Linda stopped cleaning and listened carefully. She knew she shouldn't be listening to private conversations, but she couldn't help herself. "Yes, sir, I know how much money is involved," Sharon continued. $2 billion, the jobs of 300 people, the future of this company. I'm not taking this lightly, but I need more time. There was a long pause while Sharon listened to whoever was on the other end of the phone. "A complete redesign of the electrical system?" Sharon's voice rose. "Sir, that would take 2 years and cost at least another $500 million. Are you sure that's what the Pentagon wants?" Linda's heart sank. A complete redesign meant starting over from the beginning. It meant all the work of the past 5 years would be wasted. It meant hundreds of people would lose their jobs, including her. "I understand, General Wilson. If we can't solve this by Monday, we'll start looking at redesign options." "Thank you, sir." Sharon hung up the phone and put her head in her hands. Linda had never seen the tough engineer look so defeated. Sharon had always seemed confident and in control, but now she looked exhausted and scared. Linda knew this was her moment. She had been thinking about the problem for days, and she was more and more convinced that she knew what was wrong. But approaching Sharon Brooks seemed impossible. What would a senior engineer think about getting advice from a janitor? Linda stood in the hallway for several minutes, holding her cleaning supplies and trying to get up the courage to knock on Sharon's door. Her hands were shaking, and her heart was beating fast. Everything in her life had taught her to stay quiet, to not draw attention to herself, to let the educated people handle the important decisions. But then Linda thought about her children, Maria and Carlos. She thought about Rosa and the other janitors who would lose their jobs if the F-47 program was canceled. She thought about Major Alex Turner, who had risked his life flying the broken plane. And she thought about all the other pilots who might fly the F-47 in the future if the electrical problem wasn't fixed properly. Linda took a deep breath and knocked softly on Sharon's door. "Come in," Sharon said, not looking up from her desk. Linda stepped into the office, still holding her cleaning supplies. "Excuse me, Ms. Brooks, I'm sorry to bother you." Sharon looked up, surprised to see the night janitor standing in her doorway. "Oh, hello. I'm sorry. What's your name?" "Linda Martinez. I clean this office every night." "Right, Linda. I'm sorry, but I'm really busy right now. Could you come back later to clean? I have a lot of work to do." Linda's courage almost failed her. The voice in her head told her to apologize and leave. Sharon Brooks was an important engineer with a college degree and years of experience. What business did a janitor have bothering her? But Linda forced herself to speak. "Ms. Brooks, I know this might sound strange, but I think I might know what's wrong with the F-47. Sharon stared at Linda for a long moment. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "The electrical problem with the jet. I think I know what's causing it." Sharon's first reaction was to dismiss Linda completely. The idea that a cleaning lady could solve a problem that had stumped a team of expert engineers was ridiculous. But something about Linda's calm confidence made Sharon pause. "Linda, I appreciate your concern, but this is a very complex technical problem. We have engineers with advanced degrees working on this around the clock." "I know," Linda said quietly. But I have some technical background too. I studied electrical engineering in college. This surprised Sharon. You did? Yes, ma'am. I was 1 semester away from graduating when I had to quit school. But I never stopped learning, and I've been watching this project for years. Sharon was exhausted and desperate. Against her better judgment, she decided to listen. Okay, Linda. You have 5 minutes. Tell me what you think. Linda's hands were still shaking, but she began to explain her theory. I think the problem is electromagnetic interference between 2 specific circuit boards, the main flight computer and the backup navigation system. Sharon frowned. Those systems are in completely different parts of the plane. They're separated by several feet of metal shielding. Yes, but under certain conditions, they can still interfere with each other. When the plane reaches a specific altitude and speed combination, the electrical fields from both systems interact in a way that causes a cascade failure. That's impossible, Sharon said. We designed those systems to be completely independent. Linda continued, her confidence growing as she talked about something she understood. The interference only happens when specific conditions are met. That's why it doesn't show up in ground tests or normal flight tests. The plane has to be at exactly the right altitude, flying at exactly the right speed for exactly the right amount of time. Sharon was beginning to listen more carefully. Linda was using technical terms correctly and seemed to understand complex electrical concepts. During the test flight last Tuesday, Linda continued, Major Turner was flying at 15,000 feet at 450 miles per hour for about 12 minutes. Those are exactly the conditions that would cause the interference. How do you know the specific flight conditions? Sharon asked. I clean Mr. Thompson's office every night. I've seen the flight data, reports. Sharon realized that Linda had access to all the technical information in the building. As a janitor, she went everywhere and saw everything, but no one paid any attention to her. Even if your theory is correct, Sharon said, proving it would take weeks of testing. Linda reached into her cleaning cart and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I drew a diagram of the interference pattern. If you run a specific test using these exact parameters, you should be able to reproduce the problem. Sharon took the paper and unfolded it. She was amazed to see a detailed electrical diagram drawn in pencil. The diagram showed the 2 circuit boards and the potential interference pattern between them. It was technically accurate and professionally drawn. Where did you learn to draw diagrams like this? Sharon asked. My father was an electrician, and I studied engineering for 3 years. I've been thinking about this problem for weeks. Sharon studied the diagram more carefully. Linda's theory actually made sense. It would explain why all the systems failed at once, and why the problem only occurred under specific flight conditions. Linda, I have to ask you something. Why didn't you speak up sooner? Linda looked down at the floor. Who would listen to a janitor talking about advanced engineering problems? I was afraid people would laugh at me. Sharon felt ashamed. She realized that Linda had been invisible to all of them, not because she lacked knowledge or intelligence, but because they had never bothered to see her as anything more than a cleaning lady. Well, I'm listening now, Sharon said. And if your theory is correct, you might have just saved this entire program. Saturday morning arrived with unusual excitement at Northwind Aerospace. Sharon Brooks had called an emergency meeting with her investigation team, but she hadn't told them why. Derek Thompson, Ryan Clark, and Amy Foster gathered in the conference room, wondering what new development could be important enough to bring them in on a weekend. I want everyone to sit down, Sharon said as she entered the room carrying Linda's hand-drawn diagram. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound unbelievable. Derek pushed his glasses up his nose and looked curious. Did you figure out what's wrong with the F-47? Maybe, Sharon replied, but the solution didn't come from any of us. She placed Linda's diagram on the table where everyone could see it. The pencil drawing showed 2 circuit boards and the electrical interference pattern between them. This diagram was drawn by Linda Martinez, one of our night janitors. She believes she knows what caused the system failure. Ryan Clark laughed out loud. You're joking, right? A janitor thinks she can solve what we couldn't? I thought the same thing at first. Sharon admitted. But look at this diagram. It's technically accurate and shows a real understanding of electrical engineering. Amy Foster picked up the paper and studied it carefully. As an electronics specialist, she could tell that whoever drew this diagram knew what they were doing. This actually makes sense, she said quietly. If these two systems interfere with each other at specific frequencies, it could cause a cascade failure. Derek was less impressed. Even if the theory is correct, it's just a guess. We need proof before we waste time on ideas from a cleaning lady. Sharon had expected this reaction. Linda suggested a specific test we can run to prove her theory. She gave me exact parameters that should reproduce the interference. Fine, Derek said with a sigh. Let's waste a few hours testing the janitor's theory. When it doesn't work, maybe we can get back to real engineering. Sharon assigned Lisa Chen, one of their junior engineers, to set up the test. Lisa was young and eager to prove herself, so she didn't care where good ideas came from. She carefully followed Linda's suggested parameters, setting up the electrical equipment exactly as the diagram showed. The test took 2 hours to prepare. Lisa connected monitoring equipment to both circuit boards and created the exact conditions Linda had described. When everything was ready, she started the test and watched her computer screen for results. Within minutes, the monitoring equipment began showing unusual readings. The electrical fields from both circuit boards were interfering with each other, just as Linda had predicted. "I'm getting interference patterns," Lisa announced to the team. "The frequency matches exactly what the diagram suggested." Derek moved closer to look at Lisa's screen. His confident expression began to change as he saw the test results. "That's impossible," he muttered. Amy Foster ran her own tests on the same equipment. She was amazed to see that Linda's theory was completely correct. "The interference only happens under very specific conditions," Amy reported. "That's why we never found it in our regular tests." Ryan Clark had stopped laughing. He stared at the test results in disbelief. "A janitor figured this out? How is that possible?" Sharon felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. Relief because they finally had an answer to the F-47's problems. Embarrassment because they had ignored someone who could have solved this days ago. "We need to call Paul Mitchell and Jonathan Hayes immediately," Sharon said. "And we need to find Linda Martinez and thank her." Word of Linda's breakthrough spread through Northwind Aerospace like wildfire. By Sunday morning, everyone in the company had heard the story about the janitor who solved the F-47 mystery. Some people were amazed, others were skeptical, but everyone was talking about it. Paul Mitchell, the chief engineer who had never acknowledged Linda's existence, asked to meet with her personally. Linda was nervous about meeting with such an important person, but she agreed to come in on Sunday morning. "Ms. Martinez," Paul said when Linda arrived at his office, "I owe you an apology. I've been working at this company for 25 years, and I've never been more wrong about anything." Linda sat quietly, not sure what to say. She had never expected an apology from Paul Mitchell. "Your solution is brilliant," Paul continued. "Simple, elegant, and correct. We've been looking at this problem the wrong way for weeks, and you saw what we couldn't see." "I just noticed some patterns in the data," Linda said modestly. "It was much more than that. You understood our electrical systems better than some of our engineers. I should have paid attention to you years ago." CEO Jonathan Hayes also wanted to meet with Linda. He called her into his office Monday morning, along with Sharon Brooks and Paul Mitchell. "Ms. Martinez," Jonathan said, "your discovery has saved this company. The Pentagon was ready to cancel the F-47 program, but now we can fix the problem and move forward." Linda still couldn't believe how much her life had changed in just a few days. "I was just trying to help," she said. "Well, you did much more than help," Jonathan replied. "You saved hundreds of jobs and a $2 billion project. We want to offer you a position in our engineering department." Linda's eyes filled with tears. She had dreamed of working as an engineer for 12 years, but had never thought it would actually happen. "The position comes with a salary of $75,000 a year," Jonathan continued. "That's about 5 times what you're making now." Linda thought about her children, Maria and Carlos, and how this job would change their lives. She could move them to a better neighborhood, help them go to college, and finally use her education the way she had always wanted. "I accept," Linda said, smiling through her tears. The story of Linda's success didn't stay inside Northwind Aerospace for long. A local reporter named Jennifer Adams heard about the janitor who saved a military jet program and asked for an interview. Linda was shy about talking to reporters, but Sharon Brooks encouraged her to tell her story. "People need to hear about this," Sharon told Linda. "Your story shows that good ideas can come from anywhere." The local news story was picked up by national television networks. Soon, Linda was being interviewed on morning shows and news programs across the country. People were fascinated by the story of an overlooked janitor who turned out to be a brilliant engineer. Major Alex Turner, the pilot who had experienced the original system failure, insisted on meeting Linda in person. When he visited Northwind Aerospace the following week, he shook Linda's hand and thanked her personally. "You may have saved my life," Alex told her. "If this problem had happened during a combat mission instead of a test flight, I might not have made it back." Linda was touched by Alex's gratitude, but she was even more pleased to know that her solution would keep other pilots safe in the future. The F-47 Lightning program was back on track. Linda's simple shielding modification would cost less than $50,000 to implement across the entire fleet of jets. Compared to the cost of redesigning the whole electrical system, it was practically free. Derek Thompson, who had been the most skeptical about Linda's theory, became one of her strongest supporters. "I learned something important from this," he told his colleagues. "Smart people can be found anywhere. From now on, I'm going to listen when anyone has an idea, no matter what their job title is." Linda's transformation from invisible janitor to celebrated engineer was complete. But more importantly, her courage to speak up had changed the way Northwind Aerospace valued all of its employees. 6 months later, Linda Martinez sat in her new office on the 3rd floor of Northwind Aerospace, looking out the window at the runway where the F-47 Lightning jets were being tested. She still couldn't believe how much her life had changed since that Friday night when she knocked on Sharon Brooks' door. Her office was small but comfortable, with a desk, computer, and bookshelves filled with engineering manuals. On the wall hung her college diploma, which she had finally been able to finish through night classes that the company paid for. Next to it was a photo of her children, Maria and Carlos, taken on the day she graduated. Linda's new job title was Senior Systems Analyst, and she worked directly with Sharon Brooks' engineering team. Her salary of $75,000 a year had completely changed her family's life. They had moved from their small apartment to a nice house in a better neighborhood. Maria was now a senior in high school and had been accepted to 3 different colleges. Carlos was doing better in school and had joined the robotics club. The F-47 Lightning program had become one of the most successful military aircraft projects in recent history. Linda's electromagnetic interference solution had been implemented in all the jets, and there had been no more system failures. The Pentagon was so pleased with the results that they had ordered 50 additional aircraft. Linda still worked some night shifts, but now it was by choice rather than necessity. She had volunteered to be part of the quality assurance team that did final inspections of completed aircraft. Her unique perspective, gained from years of observing the engineering process, helped her spot potential problems that others might miss. "Linda, could you take a look at this wiring diagram?" Derek Thompson called from across the office. Derek had become one of Linda's closest colleagues and strongest supporters. The engineer who had once laughed at the idea of a janitor solving technical problems now regularly asked for Linda's opinion on difficult projects. Linda walked over to Derek's desk and studied the diagram he was showing her. It was for a new communication system they were installing in the F-47s. "I see a potential issue here," Linda said, pointing to a section of the diagram. "These 2 circuits are running very close together. Under certain temperature conditions, you might get some interference." Derek looked at the diagram more carefully. "You're right. I hadn't noticed that. We should separate those circuits by at least 6 inches. "That should solve it," Linda agreed. This kind of interaction had become normal at Northwind Aerospace. Linda's colleagues had learned to value her insights and technical knowledge. She had a way of looking at problems from different angles that often revealed solutions others had missed. Paul Mitchell had also changed his attitude completely. The chief engineer who had once ignored Linda now made sure she was included in all important project meetings. Linda brings a perspective that none of the rest of us have, Paul told new employees. She sees things we miss because she approaches problems differently. The company had established the Linda Martinez Innovation Award to recognize employees who demonstrated exceptional problem-solving skills, regardless of their position. The first winner was Rosa Valdez, Linda's friend from the janitorial staff, who had identified a safety hazard in the paint shop that could have caused a serious accident. Rosa had been promoted to facilities management after Linda recommended her for the position. Linda didn't forget about us when she became an engineer, Rosa told other employees. She made sure the company started listening to everyone's ideas. Several other support staff members had also been given opportunities to showcase their hidden talents. Carl Johnson, Linda's former supervisor, had apologized for making fun of her and now worked closely with the engineering department to identify employees with technical skills who might be working in the wrong positions. The changes at Northwind Aerospace had attracted attention from business schools and management consultants. Linda's story had become a case study about the importance of inclusive workplace cultures and listening to all employees. She was regularly invited to speak at conferences and universities about her experience. The most important lesson from my story, Linda would tell audiences, is that good ideas can come from anywhere. Companies that ignore their employees' knowledge and insights are wasting valuable resources. Major Alex Turner had also benefited from the changes Linda's success had brought about. He had been promoted to colonel and was now in charge of testing all new military aircraft. Alex made sure that pilots' feedback was taken seriously by engineering teams, just as Linda's observations had eventually been taken seriously. Linda saved my life, and probably the lives of many other pilots, Alex would say when people asked him about the F-47 incident. But more importantly, she showed us that we need to listen to everyone who has something valuable to contribute. Linda often reflected on how her life had changed since that frightening Tuesday morning when the F-47 had nearly crashed. She had gone from being invisible to being one of the most respected people at the company. But the change that meant the most to her was the opportunity to finally use her education and talents in a meaningful way. Her children were proud of their mother's success. Maria was planning to study engineering in college, inspired by her mother's example. Carlos had developed an interest in electronics and often asked Linda to help him with science projects. "I'm proud that my kids see me as more than just someone who cleans buildings," Linda told Sharon during one of their regular lunch meetings. "They know that I'm an engineer who happens to have started as a janitor." Sharon had become not just Linda's supervisor but also her friend and mentor. "You've changed this whole company," Sharon told her. "We're all better engineers because of what you taught us." The F-47 Lightning jets were now flying missions around the world, protecting pilots and completing successful operations. Every time Linda saw one of the jets take off from the company runway, she felt proud knowing that her work had helped make those aircraft safe and reliable. Linda's story had reached far beyond Northwind Aerospace. She received letters from people all over the country who had been inspired by her example. Some were janitors and maintenance workers who had started speaking up about problems they observed. Others were engineers and managers who had begun listening more carefully to their colleagues at all levels. One letter that particularly touched Linda came from a young woman named Patricia who worked as a cafeteria worker at another aerospace company. Patricia had noticed a pattern in the food service equipment that seemed related to some electrical problems the company was having. Inspired by Linda's story, Patricia had spoken up, and her observation had led to an important discovery. "Your courage gave me the courage to speak up," Patricia had written. "Thank you for showing me that my voice matters too." As Linda looked out her office window at the busy runway, she thought about how far she had come from those lonely nights cleaning offices and dreaming of being an engineer. She had finally found her place in the world, using her talents to solve important problems and help keep people safe. But perhaps most importantly, Linda had proven that brilliance and valuable insights can be found anywhere, and that the most important voices are sometimes the ones that go unheard for far too long. Her journey from invisible janitor to celebrated engineer had changed not only her own life, but had opened doors for countless others who had been overlooked because of their job titles rather than recognized for their knowledge and abilities. The simple woman who had once been mocked as just a janitor had indeed saved the world's most advanced jet, and in doing so, had saved herself and shown the world the true value of listening to everyone.